What we're going to talk about now is a program that's been under development and under discussion for quite some time. For those that were at our event last year, our Foxfire event, you might remember or recall Dale Elsoff, who presented on an idea called Spartans Without Borders. For those that were here, or maybe you've heard that title as Dale's been traversing around campus talking about that. What we've done over the past few months is take the idea of Spartans Without Borders and transform it, adding some dimensions that you'll hear about today, and really try to engage undergraduates, alumni, and different components, which you'll hear more about in a minute. I'd like to invite up some of our SpartanCorps team members. Carl, if you'll come up, Joni, if you'll come up, Rick, if you'll come on up. So what I want to do today is give you a little bit of an overview about where we are with the concept of SpartanCorps. And we've got some pilots that are forming, so we want to tell you a little bit about those. Before we do that, I want to talk with you a little bit about a couple of things when this initiative first started, and the ladies are going to be passing around some information. One of the first things that we did is decide that if we're going to talk about this, we need to become a little bit more intelligent about it. And that's one of the reasons why you just heard the panel that was here talking about experiential learning. So we hired Carla as a graduate assistant, and Carla started doing some work on researching experiential learning, transformational learning, engaged learning, all the different titles that we know or may have heard about. So what's coming around is just a quick kind of recap of what Carla has been finding as she's been doing her research. And I want to ask her to talk a little bit about that, just some of the things, maybe some of the highlights that she's been discovering as she's gone through the process. So, Carla?
Sure. Well, what I'm finding is, as they mentioned earlier, many people define experiential learning different. It comes in all shapes and sizes, different types of programs. And so thus far, I've just been kind of trying to get a landscape of what that looks like across all the programs here at Michigan State. What are people doing in classes and international programs, service programs? How are they assessing each of those types of programs? And then what's happening in the broader landscape outside of Michigan State. So I'm in the beginning stages of that collection, and as you can imagine, it's broad. And so I'm looking forward to next steps in kind of pintailing that down to help us define what we're going to be doing.
Thanks, Carla. So one of the, as I said, one of the components was trying to get an understanding of kind of where the literature stands right now. And again, we heard some aspects of a little bit of history, a little bit of the direction here at MSU, where experiential learning is going and headed, and also led in very nicely to some of the thinking that you're going to hear about as we talk about SpartanCorps and what it is and what it might eventually mean here at MSU. Another component that we've been working on as we've looked at this, and we talked about this, or you heard the panelists talk a little bit about this toward the end, which is the importance of being able to assess these experiences and being able to look at them and understand what's happening. We talk a lot about when students go on a study abroad experience, or when they have a different type of learning experience that might be an internship or a co-op or something along those lines. We often hear them come back and say, that changed my life. That made a really big difference in the way that I think about things or the way I view the world. But when you start to try to drill down and really understand what part of the experience, what part of the actual thing that they did contributed to that, it gets harder to understand what that is. So part of this work that we're doing is trying to get a sense for how we might assess experiential learning. It's not just the experiential learning that would happen in the SpartanCorps experiences, but we heard about the plethora and the number of different types of things that are going on. So applying that approach and that tool to those elements. So we'd be interested in your thinking and your thoughts on those pieces as we go through our conversation today. So let me start. I want to give you a sense, and as you can imagine, when you're talking about a new project and a new program, the definition of this and the idea for this continues to evolve. And so that's why I'm going to read this to you so that I make sure that I capture our latest and greatest thinking. So SpartanCorps is a program through which MSU faculty, staff, and students and alumni work together with and in communities on projects that help improve quality of life and innovate solutions to global challenges. Right? Did that make sense to anyone? Did that resonate? Does that sound a little bit like experiential learning? What's different in that, or what is there anything in there that concerns you? Just curious. Sure, good. We'll get to that. That's a great question, Kisa. We'll talk about that. That's part of the approach. Hi.
It sounds a bit broader than just service learning, because it encompasses, your statement encompasses community-based research.
Exactly.
It encompasses internships and experience working in a company or things like that. It's a much broader frame. I think that's probably pretty good. Second thing is, for you to think about, are you aware of the national movement on citizen loans?
We've heard about it, but I wouldn't say we're informed probably as we should be.
I think you should be, because I think this is a perfect way for Michigan State University to do citizen loans. And Ted DeJour and myself and Scott Westerman are involved with that. This would be a real concrete, substantive way.
I was going to say that's we've heard about it from Scott and as we've talked with the connection with alumni. So let me talk a little bit about kind of what we're thinking in relationship to a couple of the value propositions in here, and I'm kind of curious how these resonate with you, because as you heard the group earlier talk on experiential learning, we learned a little bit about a lot of the different activities that are already going on, the different types of programs or projects or experiences that people can partake in. So one thought as we think about kind of a value proposition, or how this is different maybe, is a way to think about it. So one of the concepts that's floating around now is that what we would be able to do would be bring kind of the whole of the Spartan community, and that students, alumni, faculty, staff, to help solve grand global challenges. So that's a concept that permeates within that. What's your reaction to that? Does that sound really fluffy? Does that sound meaningful? Does it make anybody's hair stand up? I don't have any hair, so that doesn't happen to me. But curious, Nate.
To what extent are folks outside of the group that you just listed as participating? So to what extent are communities involved in identifying?
That's a great question. That's a great question. At the center of this really is community engagement practices. Kind of the best practices of community engagement. And so this really all starts with the community identifying a problem within the community, or set of problems in the community, and then being able to match the resources, if you will, or the skills or the knowledge of the different elements. So here we're talking about alumni, or we're talking about students, or we may be talking about both if the situation warrants that or merits that or makes that possible. So you'll hear in a little bit about some of the pilot projects, and Rick's going to talk about international engagement in Mexico, and hear about some of the issues and some of the problems that are happening there, and where a SpartanCorps-like solution might be something that would be very beneficial. And I'm going to pick on a couple of you that are here, because I know you've talked with Dale about some of the things that you're thinking about as well. So I'd be curious to see, because what we're really commissioned to do at this point is to, over the next 12 months or so, to actually carry out at least a couple of pilots to begin to understand exactly how this can work. We've been talking about it for a long time. We probably talked with many of you about it. So we're saying, okay, let's do this. Let's actually see how this can work and what can happen. So we've turned it a pilot so that if we blow up the lab, which hopefully we won't, but if we blow up the lab, we don't kill all the subjects, hopefully, but we can learn from that. and we can take that back and incorporate that into the thinking and the design. The other piece of it that's important is also really understanding the business model behind how this can work. And so part of this is not just doing a couple of pilots, part of this is understanding how this can become sustainable. And we heard Frank in his last comments talk about how we know, or at least we believe strongly, that alumni will pay to participate in these types of experiences. We've heard that as we've talked with alumni and focus groups, and we've talked with different people. We've heard it from students as well. Students would say, I'm not necessarily sure how this fits into my credit model because I have so many things that I'm trying to do, but if I'm passionate about something and I believe in it, I would want to participate, and I would pay to do that. So those are some of the concepts and some of the things that we would be testing. The other piece that we're talking about is, and I've kind of already alluded to this, is really trying to build on the best practices of community engagement and really understanding what the needs and the issues are. I think another important part of this is that we're looking at a sustained approach. So this wouldn't necessarily be a one-time research project that's done over the course of a semester. This would be looking at a grander problem, a grander challenge, and continuing to bring the Spartan community to solving that problem over time. So there might be a group of alumni that go for a period of 10 days. And then in some of our programming, we might not go back for another year. There might not be another study abroad project for another year, or there may not be one for 5 years. What we're saying here is, does it make sense to have a sustained approach where we can say, let's look at this problem, let's look at the resources that we have available, and let's bring to bear the Spartan community and the assets that we have on that problem over a sustained period of time. So that's a tenet that I think maybe separates this from some of the other activities and other things that we're doing. So we have a few goals that we've set out. These are somewhat oriented to the pilot, but they also have overarching meaning as this concept moves forward. So we want to create a meaningful and potentially transformative experience for alumni. One of the things that we've heard is we talked with alums, they've said, while I was here, I had a tremendous experience. I got to go on a study abroad. I got to participate in this internship. I got to do this research project. Then I left. I went on and I got a job. Now I want to come back and I want to re-engage. How do I do that? There's not a mechanism for me to do that. I get the letters where I can donate money. I get that communication, and those come forthright, and they're right there in my mailbox, every month. But how do I engage? How do I become active in what's happening around the world and all the great things that we're doing as Spartans? So that's where that idea comes from. We also want to create an experiential, real-world opportunity for students to develop and master competencies related to their field of study and liberal learning goals. So this ties back in to the undergraduate liberal learning goals, ties into what might be happening at the graduate level, and bringing those pieces together. We need to recruit alumni, staff, and others with life and professional experiences to help fill gaps in the community. So where there are service gaps. And that's one of the things we've heard as we've been out and talking with different communities. One, we hear things like, don't send one more person to my community because I can't handle it. We're overwhelmed. So that's one thing that we heard. Another thing that we heard is the Spartan community has been great. They've helped us here, and they've helped us here, but what we really need is we need this. And then sometimes this is, we need people with more experience and more expertise, equated to alumni if you're able to make that leap. We'd love to have students, but we want a group that has more expertise, more experience, more context for the problems that are here. So could you bring alumni or other groups to help us solve our problems? So we're seeing that as a gap area in what we're talking about. Certainly financial sustainability and being able to generate revenue with this is key, or finding funding, and we've talked with a number of different groups about ways that could happen, whether it's direct fees, people paying fees to participate, whether that's actually finding sponsorship, whether that's actually building endorsement types of programs where if it's an undergraduate student that's going out, they can actually receive a stipend or some other type of payment for their service. So part of this pilot is to understand what some of those business models might look like and actually try to employ those. as we move forward. We want to create a unique and innovative experience for students and alumni that address MSU's Bolder by Design, the Spartans Will, and the other branding initiatives at the university. The idea here is, how could this set us apart from what's happening at comparable institutions? We heard a little bit in the earlier talks today about what the private institutions are doing, and how over the last 10 years, particularly in the online world, they've started to dictate that space and what quality means, and they've set a pretty low bar, I think, in most of our opinions. So we're saying, how can this experience in this program set us apart, or move us to a different place in the way that we're viewed within that context? So I'd be curious of your thinking on that. And of course, we want to be intentional in looking at how research can be part of this. We realize that a lot of times it takes time for research to develop and those opportunities to be in place, but as we look at how we might be able to say, look at research and community engagement, how things happen in community, and then crossing that over into the actual disciplinary research involved in these projects. So we want to be intentional about that, because we know if we're not, those things more than likely won't happen. So that's part of the concept of the design. So I want to pause there for a minute. Reaction to those goals? Lofty?
Yeah, man, that's a lot of goals, Jerry. How are you going to do it?
Yeah, good. Nice segue. I'm curious if not that wasn't a legitimate question, but
That was the setup.
yeah, that was a good setup.
So you want to create. So just a question. So you want to create an ecosystem where people can sort of propose projects and other people can engage in those projects. Is that the basic idea? You're focused on the ecosystem, right?
Yeah, we want to build an environment where that type of activity can happen somewhat organically. We don't envision. Obviously, we're trying to do something in the pilot phase that's manageable, that we can, one, logistically manage, be able to look at and evaluate and say, okay, we did these things right. This could have been done better. But the idea here is that ultimately these could move at a pretty rapid pace as opportunities, as challenges evolve in different discipline areas and across disciplines, where by building this core, which is part of where the core idea comes from, that we could react to these relatively quickly and I don't want to sound too military here, but mobilize teams, if you will, and respond to these. Now, obviously, that takes infrastructure, that takes planning, that takes logistics, and a lot of that, or most of that, or none of that, happens without funding, without support. So that's a key element of this: is how does this become sustainable?
Thank you. One of the things you need to think about is projects come and go. We're doing projects. We have 7,000 projects in our database now of MSU faculty around the world. So they come and go, but that's not what produces sustainable change in communities. So most community-based participatory research folks would say that the real sustainability that you want to target somewhere along the way, in addition to projects, is the transfer of knowledge. Because what's sustainable is, I now know how to solve this problem. I don't need you anymore. And so that's a critical part of sustainability, because everybody's going to need another orphanage, everybody's going to need another neighborhood cleaned up, everybody's going to need another hospital, whatever that is. And those projects are nice, but those things are not sustainable. Governments change, neighborhoods change, we change, all those kind of things. What doesn't change is the transfer of knowledge that can grow.
Great point. That's really good. Will somebody just pass the mic back up? Just work it back up here. We'll make Greg the poor mic boy. Thanks, Greg. Oh, okay, thanks, Greg.
Thank you. I think it's a tremendous idea, as I alluded to in my comments earlier. I think a couple of things, just certainly connecting to what Hai said. I wouldn't go so far as to be glib to say plug and play, but Michigan State has a presence all over the world with partnerships So the question, and we did this all the time in our college, to identify those areas where work has been ongoing for some time, where having a group of alum fits into the ongoing evolution that leads to what Hai's talking about, sustainability. I think one of the biggest challenges to avoid is basically to use this as an instrument to start something. It needs to be part of it. The other thing is, if you flip this coin over, and I mentioned before about being on the board of the Fort Myers chapter, the Alumni Association is organized by chapters. It would seem to me one of the things that would really be lower hanging fruit is to identify one or two, no more than 3 chapters that would say, we're on board, how can we do this? And they'll mobilize their membership. We have a colleague who's an alum in Fort Myers who is gung-ho on community service and has organized a variety of community service activities in the Fort Myers area. If he were to hear about this, he would say, when can we start? When can we get Fort Myers folks involved in this?
And we've heard that as we've been talking with alumni. What I'd like to do now is actually have Rick Paulson talk about the international engagement in Mexico experience, because it is something that's been long-standing, something 15 years, some whereabouts, or is this the 15th year? Yeah, not trying, no carbon dating here. Yeah, so I'd like Rick to talk with you a little bit about that project and how we see the connections with that project and how they relate to SpartanCorps. So, Rick, thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. My name is Rick Paulson. I'm with the Department of Community Sustainability, formerly CARS. Frank retired from CARS, but it's evolved since he left.
The day after.
The day after. Actually, it was a day after. So International Engagement in Mexico actually had its beginnings in the Service Learning Center as an alternative spring break program. And over time, it shifted to study abroad, in part because of finances and other management issues. And it grew from approximately 40 students who were going to Merida, Mexico, to about 140 students who last year went to Merida, Campeche, Puebla, and Oaxaca. Yeah, I always forget Oaxaca. So 4 cities, anyway. It's really an awareness-producing program. And that's the way we look at it, because it's a blended program. It's the most diverse study abroad program that the university offers. It's also the largest, and it's also one of the shortest, because we go out during spring break. So we prepare before we go. We go for approximately 9 full days, and then we come back and we reflect for 2 class sessions. Students write papers, and while we're there, they reflect. So we as well as that sort of academic structure, we have the engagement piece. The academic focus is civic engagement. The reason we're in Mexico is to engage with agencies that provide services in each of these cities. So students will go in, and the easy entry point is to do maintenance work, cleaning, painting, and so on. What has evolved over time is the engagement with personnel in the agency, the service population, students, senior citizens, whatever that may be, on a personal level. So the students, their level of engagement is deepened, over the time has deepened, to develop some personal relationships with staff and service population, as well as local community members. Because each year, we go back to the same agencies. So for a number of years, Merida was the first city. So we've been involved with 5 agencies in Merida for approximately that full 15 years. So as we think about, in particular, Spartans Without Borders, the international engagement approach becomes an operational model, so to speak, at least a starting point, to examine how do we go to some place that MSU has a presence, has a history, and therefore relationships, because that's, it's been alluded to, but that's the bottom. The connecting point is a set of relationships. And we work with agencies, and our interest is to assist those agencies. We can only do so much, obviously. When Dale started talking about Spartans Without Borders, that was exciting for us because we have always wanted to be able to do more. So this was a way of extending what we were doing in some ways, or at least potentially doing that. The other aspect, there are several operational aspects I think that relate to Spartans Without Borders, at least in the development of the concept, is our leadership, our partnerships, our sort of academic structure, because we also, if alums are going, we want them to take away something. And so that piece needs to be there. We are an educational institution, so we don't want their education to stop. And so we have those elements to draw from for this development of Spartans Without Borders. The outcomes that students demonstrate, express in their papers and in our own research related to Spartans Without Borders is exciting. In part because students, as a result of their experience, report that they have a stronger appreciation for their degree. In addition to that, a stronger connection to the university. So with alums, that's one of the goals I would think we want to have, is enhancing this relationship and being able to do more with that relationship in the future. And so that, and then the last aspect is the excitement that it produces. Students are absolutely geeked by the experience, basically. They want to do more, which is also what they report in our research. And so there's much that can happen afterward. And I think that's one of the promises of Spartans Without Borders, is that more can happen as a result of that relationship. If you do have any additional questions about the study abroad program, two of our program leaders are here. Carla has been one, is currently one, and Emily Holly in the back is one of our program leader alums, which is the basis of our success, really, is their leadership.
Good, thanks, Rick. As we've gotten to this place in time, I will also wanted to recognize some of the folks who've been kind of instrumental in guiding us and helping us think about this and serve on our advisory board. Brett Bergquist from Study Abroad has been instrumental. Doug Gage from the Office of Research, Michael Kaplowitz from the College of Ag and Natural Resources, Jim Lucas from undergraduate area. Jim's here if you haven't met Jim. Lisa Parker from the Alumni Association, and also Rick Paulson, who you see here before us. Also wanted to recognize, as I didn't do this in the beginning, some of the other folks on the team, just so I know many of you know us, but just in case you don't. Unfortunately, Dale Elsoff, who's the project lead on this program, had a health issue in her family, so she wasn't able to be with us. She was here earlier, but had to leave for an appointment. Joni Epps, down on the end, she's the project coordinator for this project with us. And then, as I mentioned, Carla is a graduate assistant with us on the project. So without them, we wouldn't be where we are today, certainly without the help and the advice of our advisory board. So I want to talk a little bit, Rick mentioned the pilot projects and this opportunity to do the one in Mexico. As we continue to talk about this and share the concept, there's a real quick opportunity that's surfacing in Belize, and we're looking at hopefully maybe being able to do something this winter in Belize. And then yesterday, for those that are following the food movement, there was a huge initiative, the Food Plus Detroit initiative. How many people are familiar with that? I've heard about that. Okay. Okay, so the Food Plus Detroit group met yesterday. They had their, they call it their first annual convening, but actually they brought the community together last July. So yesterday was bringing the community back together to kind of report on progress and what they've done and where it's going and how the community can be involved in that project. And I know as Pat Paulsell, she's still here, it looks like she was there. So we got an opportunity to hear about the progress that they've made, but also to hear from community partners and some of the issues and challenges that they're facing, and that's exactly how the Food Plus Detroit team framed it. And so within that conversation and talking with those people, we probably identified about 15 projects that we could certainly pursue, but one of them that looks really promising and most likely would probably happen sometime next year would be with the Detroit public school system. And when you think about the number of students that are in that system, and when you think about that from a food perspective, the logistics of that, the waste, the energy, all of those pieces, there are tons of opportunities to approach that project. So I wanted to, Larry, are you, a light shine in my eyes, but it looks like you back there. I know you had an opportunity to talk with Dale today a little bit. Would you mind coming up just and sharing a little bit about what you're thinking about with your Peru experience? Because one of the things that we want you to try to hear as we're talking today about the different types of activities and problems and issues that are out there and how they might be able to relate to this program. So
totally unexpected.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
I've been going to Peru for about 4 years. It started with the extension program called International Extension Training Program, where Andrew started. I'm the one in the class that has continued this effort. I'm working on specifically ag development, working in the highlands of Peru, Central Highlands, community of 1,500 people, live on $1 a day. My host, Gio Moses, says they consider me the potato expert. I'm not. I'm a linker. He said, Larry, all I need is a little bit of knowledge to grow a few more potatoes to make a little bit more money. I said, what a challenge that is. If I can't do that, I don't deserve to be here on earth. So I've continued that effort, linked with a lot of local experts, agencies. I continued that involvement. Every time I go there, the mayor is right next to me. The governor of the department, state, is there with me all the time. Worked with SIPS in Lima, which is the International Potato Research Center. They develop new varieties of potatoes, improved varieties, insect, disease, resistance, drought, wet feet, a lot of other characteristics there, of course yield, shape. So we're demonstrating, we're doing extension type work out in the field, demonstrating new potato varieties, see if they will grow up in the, well, we're about 11,000 feet where I am, they're developed at the sea level. We've thrown out several already because they don't perform well. After we get good growth characteristics, good looking ones, and then we bring in the housewives, the community women into the central plaza. We boil potatoes, we make french fries, we make potato chips, we have the ladies evaluate them on a 1 to 5 Richter scale, quite a few different characteristics, so we're looking for social acceptability as well. So that project is going well. I'm going back in 3 weeks again. We're going to plant the next round of field demonstrations. Met this guy, I can't speak Spanish. I'm sitting there with high hands and goes, ooh, that looked good. And this guy's doing it back to me. Well, he's president of the Farmer Association, 195 Farmers Association. Their president is elected position 5 years. What he says goes. Everybody does what he says. He now has demonstrations on his farm. And his vision, the last time down there, my last trip, I took Olivet College study abroad class to my community for community engagement work. We did several things. One day we spent on potatoes. We're looking at his demonstration site. He says his vision is to have demonstrations throughout the entire valley of these new improved varieties so we can bring an increased revenue to the community. So potatoes is one thing there, new improved potatoes. SIPS has no outreach whatsoever. I always take money out of my pocket to get India, kind of like our extension service, some money to travel to do these plots, take the data for us. So that's one thing we're doing. We're working with the local school system. There's a 2-year tech school, post-high school, 300 students, 5 curriculum, buildings condemned. First time we went down there, they expected us, wealthy Americans, are going to rebuild their whole complex. I was going to provide money for a tissue culturing lab. I was going to provide money for a soil analysis lab. build their computer curriculum, they probably got 386 machines. I've talked to a lot of people, everybody will donate old computers, but I can't afford to take them there. It costs me more to take them there than it would be to buy them there. So out of my pocket, I bought, I think, 3 computers now for the Institute. The Institute has a vision for becoming a college, going from a 2-year to a 4-year school. I would love to see somebody, I have no expertise in that area, somebody from here that has expertise in higher ed administration to work 3 or 4 or 5 days, go back 6 months, work 3 or 4 or 5 days, work with the locals to develop a plan and next steps to do that. Water, about 30% of the houses in the community have some water. There's a plan to bring water to the community. There is no drainage. Right now, if you have a sink and have water, it just goes on the ground and soaks in. Wet feet everywhere. So there are many, many issues in this community, but you know, taking the Olivet students there made me realize, why can't I do that with Michigan State students or Michigan State alumni? There's lots of, like everywhere in the world, there's lots of needs, but there's a lot of relationships there. I now have took 3 years to get them, started in Washington, D.C., but I now have 3 Peace Corps volunteers in the community that I work with all the time. So there's somebody there that speaks English now. So I got that connection made. And that's helping me out too, to plan things. But I've been taking lots of notes here, thinking about things that might interface with SpartanCorps. So thanks for the chance. Didn't expect that.
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate it. Other questions, thoughts as we wrap up our comments about SpartanCorps? Other things not we had an opportunity to get a sense for what we're talking about. So, questions, concerns?
Hi, do you want to say something about citizen alums? Connection with citizen alums?
Citizen Alum is a national movement that's headed up by Julie Ellison down at University of Michigan, came out of Imagine America. And its goal is exactly what you articulated for alumni, to get them engaged in service learning and community projects. So I think this is a broader connection between all the segments of the university, and could be a very powerful demonstration of citizen alum in a much broader context. Don't have much more to say about that, but we could talk more. Yeah.
Other questions, thoughts? Sherry?
I work at the Broad College in the MBA programs, and I think this is a really exciting initiative that the university is taking on, and it actually, maybe coincidentally or maybe not, dovetails really well with something that we're working on as well. So I'm the director of our weekend MBA program, so we're working with students who are all working full-time and on average have about 12 years of experience after their undergrad degree. And trying to find ways to take this group of people who are in many ways privileged, particularly in the context of the world, and I'll use the word force them to do something that's, you know, out there to help the world and make it a better place. So we also have an initiative that really, hopefully this year, with our current students, we will provide them with an option to do 3 or 4 pilot projects. We're looking at building, you know, kind of having them opt in, 5-person teams, and working on a couple of projects, a couple in Detroit. We're actually working with the homeless shelters down there, we think, something here in Lansing, and potentially something on the west side, so that students can get engaged, do something real. We've got a couple of our faculty on board. We're trying to make it a couple of credit experience that they're paying their tuition for as a part of it. But again, trying to look at all of the same kind of things. How do we use it as an opportunity to engage people in a real way, to have them apply something and make a difference, but also have it educationally relevant so that we can provide credit for them, and then figure out kind of this financial model. How do we make it work, right? So.
Thanks, Sherry.
Let me correct something I said, actually. Citizen Alum actually started by Harry Boyd, who is a political science professor at the Humphrey Center in,
I don't really need that, do I? At the Humphrey Center in University of Minnesota, who convinced the Obama administration that they should put an effort around mobilizing higher education and the alumni from higher education to become involved in communities. So Julie is the leader of it, that particular aspect of what came out of there, but Harry Boyd, who has written a great deal about civic engagement as a foundational aspect of what every student from higher education should emerge from higher education, with a deep commitment to civic responsibility and the preservation of democracy. So that's sort of the historical and the academic origins of it. We have a good experience at Michigan State University of putting things into practice, so this is cool.
Thanks, Kai. Teresa, did you have a question?
Teresa Bernardo, One Health Knowledge Initiatives. I'd just like to take this opportunity to, on behalf of everybody, thank MSUglobal, the whole team, for really being leaders in innovation for MSU for all of these years. They help keep us on the cutting edge. They help us leverage technology and take things globally. And globally in many senses, not just around the world, but also from student experience through to alumni. I think that's a continuum that's really important. And I think this latest phase of experiential learning really goes to the core of what differentiates MSU. We have a long history in this area. Now, leveraging with technology, we can, again, take it global. But Chris, you talked this morning about intangibles, and that a lot of students felt that these so-called intangibles were some of the most important part of their experience at MSU. And I think what you're really trying to do is make the intangibles tangible. Learn how to measure them, how to look at them, how to value them. So I think this is a really important next phase for MSUglobal, and I hope that, well, I'm sure everybody here is with you on it.
Thanks, Teresa.
Well, thank you, Teresa.
All right, we want to save a little bit of time. We often run long in these events, so we wanted to save some time for networking. So I'm going to turn it back over to Chris for some closing comments. Thank you.
Well, thanks. This has been a really useful conversation. The whole morning has been really useful. So I think we lived up to our title, Igniting Innovation, this year. Thank you, Patrick, for renaming it. In terms of SpartanCorps, this is a series of pilots. It's not one pilot project. This is how we experiment, and you're part of informing our experiment that we will do with all of you. Certain things that we want to test in SpartanCorps are things like, can you combine alumni and undergraduate students in an experience that would actually work? Can you do it locally? Can you do it internationally? There's all kinds of issues, reasons why it's not often done. There's lots of reasons. But we want to test that assumption a little bit. That's our job. We're the sandbox where these ideas can be tested and nobody has to get themselves in trouble or look like they failed, right? Another one is, can these experiences really be built around real research agendas, right? Can the projects itself be researchable? Can the disciplinary data be gathered? What's the research angle of it? And how can we focus even more on their, HIGH's group focuses here, the scholarship of engagement and research and community and active engaged research, community-based research. That's all about what MSU does. Yet when we bring it up in these conversations, it seems to be a hard thing. It's not an easy thing to do, So how can we, is that something we want to experiment with too, is that angle? So, and the third one is assessment, right? We talked about the importance of showing evidence that these things work, all the intended and I think especially the unanticipated positive learning outcomes that come from experiential learning. How can we make those visible? How can we make them tangible? Because that's what drives the quality agenda, that's what drives the definition of quality. That's how we can create a high-value product. We know it's there, that's why we do it. Got a lot of anecdotal evidence for the aha moments and life-changing relationships that students and potentially alums make through these things. If we really wanted to superpower it, that's a big piece, and that's why I think technology has different avenues. I don't know what the right answer is yet, but we'll experiment with these types of interventions to see how we can have an impact on assessment, how we can have an impact on research, how we can have an impact on communities. I don't want to forget that part. So this is a series of pilots, and we invite you to participate with us over the next year or so in a series of iterations as we test these notions out. And then from our perspective, we're always looking for the creative technology tools in service to that mission, in service to enabling these tests to succeed or not succeed, but we got to try. So anyway, I want to thank our panelists, the SpartanCorps team, and Dale, who's here in spirit, and Carla, for working on this with us and not being, I have a book I'm going to give Dale. It's called Hacking Innovation, which is all about how not to get stuck in the, not stuck in the process, and don't get buried in all the details that make it impossible to move. We got to hack innovation. We just have to do it. And I will end with two quotes. Somehow my original teacup got misplaced, but as I looked down as I was up there, I was like, man, that's a great quote. So I'm going to read you two. One is the original, it was Walt Whitman, and he said, "People with a purpose have goals. Others have wishes, And I think, and this is MSU, we have goals, all right? We have a purpose. And I'll end with this quote. "On with the dance, let joy be unconfined," by Mark Twain. And with that, we'll close Igniting Innovation. Thanks for being with us today.
We hope you'll stick around. Network, drop off your phone.